PokeClass is sponsored by Collector's Cash, your #1 online store for all you need for the Pokemon trading card game. They always have the cards you need at great prices, even the ones that are hard to find anywhere else. Make sure you check them out for all your singles, packs, boxes, accessories, and cards from other games at www.collectorscash.com. Hey everyone, and welcome to PokeClass episode 38, which as you can see, brings the beginnings of bringing you the show in an entirely different format. First off, you're able to see my face rather than just hearing my voice, which will hopefully make the episodes a little bit more casual and easier to listen to. The second thing is a new intro, which you'll see in a moment, and the third thing will be made apparent when we get into the full swing of the episode. I hope you enjoy this new format of bringing you PokeClass, and in true YouTube fashion, I am Pokemon Dan. Right now, many of you have just started to approach the tables of your first round in the Pokemon TCG and Video Game World Championships. Congrats to all of you that made it through the last chance qualifiers, and next week will be all about the winners' decks. But today's episode is going to give those of you that aren't at Worlds a quick look at the format a month or so from now. The release of Emerging Powers is really close already, and it's going to give the format a good shaking up just before we hit the Battle Roads portion of the new season. So this episode is going to go over a ton of the inclusions in the set and how it might affect the way we play the game. As of just yesterday, we received the information we were all waiting for, the complete Emerging Powers set list. On first impressions, I'm actually quite disappointed. There were so many cards that could have made it into this set, which would have made a great shift in the metagame, but many of them just missed the final list. So I guess we're just going to have to wait for further sets before we see the likes of Kyurem, N, and Fliptini. This episode is going to be dedicated to reviewing the entire Emerging Powers set, so we'd better get to it. But before that, I have some very exciting news to give you. I'm sure many of you already know about this great piece of news about the third Black and White set. The first Pokemon introducing the revived EX mechanic has emerged, and here it is, Mewtwo Ex. Now I'm sure that you'll agree with me in saying that this card looks insanely good in terms of artwork. I can safely say that this is going to be one of my favourite looking cards of all time, better than most of the level X's out there. I think the first thing that will strike you about this is the 170 HP at Bears being just a basic. This is astounding for a basic, furthering the HP we thought was huge on Reshiram and Zekrom, making Mewtwo into quite a hard Pokemon to take down. Nothing that comes to mind can take down Mewtwo in one hit, unless a psychic type like Mismagius can rack up enough damage to make full use of the double psychic weakness. All that would give it a good serving of damage would be another Mewtwo, making for quite the mirror match. As expected, the EX mechanic has been carried along pretty much exactly the way it was previously, in the way that your opponent takes 2 prizes for knocking out one of these beefy Pokemon. I didn't play when EXs were originally around, but many people that did are super excited to see this mechanic reborn in the third Black and White set next year. As for Mewtwo's attacks, they're looking pretty good, but nothing out of the ordinary from what we've already seen. It pretty much mirrors Reshiram and Zekrom, but the effects of the attacks are different. The energy cost for both attacks is the same as both dragons, but in the respective psychic typing, and for the first, just a double colourless, does 20 damage times the number of energy attached to Mewtwo. This could rack up some decent damage in a crazy deck with Emboar, but I don't see it being too powerful otherwise. The second attack is called Psycho Drive, the exact name of the set in Japan, and does 120 damage for the cost of 2 psychic energy and a colourless, with the side effect that you must discard an energy after use. This is fairly similar to the Dragon's attacks, and seems to be in a trend with these legendary Pokemon. I wonder how many more versions of this we'll see. Overall, this card is looking pretty good, and people have already set the hype train on its way, with numerous deck lists appearing all over the place for a card that isn't coming out until next year. Before you join the hype, just remember that we have Emerging Powers and another set that's released along with this card, which could render this nowhere near as powerful as it is at the moment. So just be careful before making it your next best idea. Also, with the release of this card was a ton of random commons and uncommons from the set, and a new stadium we should be getting as well, called Battle City. This one really isn't that great and is a worse version of Speed Stadium, allowing each player to flip a coin on their turn and draw a card if it's heads. I'm sure this won't be used in any decks when we get it, since giving your opponent is something never good, but we'll just have to wait and see. That's pretty much all the news I have for you this week, so let's get on to the main part of the episode. Emerging Powers release is on the horizon, and we've got an exclusive early look at it coming tomorrow at the World Championships. But for now, let's have a quick look at what's going to be in the set and start looking forward to what they're going to bring to the competitive table. Emerging Powers has turned out to be a combination of cards from many Japanese sources, including the ones missing from Black and White, 3 cards from the Battle Strength sets, cards from the boy and girl trainer kits, and some promos. We also got some English exclusive cards expected to be released in the new Japanese set not long from now. Unfortunately, we didn't get any cards from the Red Collection, which is slightly disappointing, but that does mean that we're going to have one hell of a set early next year. But enough of what's happening later on, let's have a look at the here and now, starting off with the standout Pokemon from the set. I'm going to start off with one of the first confirmed cards from Emerging Powers, and that's Gothitelle. This Pokemon presents us with a very interesting ability called Magic Room, which blocks only opponent from playing trainers as long as Gothitelle is active. This immediately reminds the player of Vileplume, but in a very interesting different form. First off, Gothitelle must be active to have the full effect of the lock, which is great since you can make full use of your resources while limiting your opponents, which could prove to be very effective. The only bad thing about it is the attack, which needs to be usable for it to stay active for long periods of time. Mad Kinesis does 30 damage for 3 colourless energy and does 20 more damage for each psychic energy attached to Gothitelle. Say you have 3 psychic attached for the cost of the attack. This will be doing 90 damage as standard if you have all psychic attached, which isn't too bad. What is bad is that it's generally going to take 3 turns for you getting it going, unless you have some form of Junkarm, Jirachi, Shaman thing going on, which isn't going to get anywhere fast. I guess since you have the locking of your opponent there, you should be able to power up fairly quickly in comparison, but I'm not sure whether it's going to be enough to make an impact, being a stage 2 as well. Turn 2 Gothitelle is obviously the ideal setup, but Yanmega is still going around running rampant and is going to give you a lot to deal with when trying to get set up. Overall, I really don't see how well this is going to do yet, as the potential there, but needs something to make it fast enough to keep up with the metagame right now. Definitely one to watch out for. The next 3 Pokemon are kind of linked, so I'm going to tackle them together. The legendary trio, Virizion, Terrakion and Cobalion, were next to be confirmed for Emerging Powers, so let's see what they have to offer. Each of the 3 have different HP. Virizion is the lowest at 100, Cobalion next with 110, and Terrakion is up there at 120, matching the likes of Zekrom and Reshiram. I would have thought that they would have around the same HP, but the differences seem to reflect the types that they are, Grass being the lowest of the HP, and Fighting generally having a higher one. Looking at their attacks, they each have one which is identical to the other, linking them together as the legendary trio. Sacred Sword costs 2 energy of their respective type, and are colourless, to do 100 damage, with the side effect that you can't use the same attack next turn. To be honest, these attacks really aren't the best. They have the same relative cost as the likes of Reshiram and Zekrom, but do 20 damage less and can't be used the following turn. I think this safely rules them out as being used in competitive play, since they really don't have any form of energy acceleration to power them up quicker than the traditional 3-turn way. The first attacks, however, show a little bit of variation. Each of the attacks cost an energy matching the trio's type, along with a colourless, with Virizion's doing 30 and healing the same damage you inflicted. Terrakion just does 40 damage, and Cobalion does 30 damage, and the defending Pokemon must be switched with one of the bench. Out of these 3 attacks, none of them really stand out. The cost is okay for what each of them do, but I just can't see any of them making a huge dent in competitive play. Virizion seems to be able to stay active for a while, while chipping the opponent's HP down, and healing itself. Terrakion has a great type advantage over the format, such as Pokemon as Magnezone and Zekrom, and Cobalion's Force of Retreat could be handy in some situations, even with the fire weakness. Overall, I don't see any groundbreaking stuff here, but if I had to choose one, I would guess that Terrakion would be the most played, but simply because of the fighting being a great type at the moment. They could be okay in some decks, but I think the binder is going to be where they stay for now. We have a very huge bear up next in the form of Beartic. This Pokemon is a stage 1 with a fairly large 130 HP, 2 attacks and a very handy metal rather than lightning weakness. This card has been placed nicely aboard the hype train ever since it got released in Japan, simply because of reports of how well it was doing over there when paired with Vileplume from Undaunted. Beartic's first attack for a water and a double colourless does 50 damage, but then the defending Pokemon can't attack next turn. As you probably realised already, Switch is a perfect card to get out of this, which is where the idea of Vileplume comes in. Vileplume is there to reduce the amount of ways that you can get out of the attack clock provided by Beartic, and your opponent is going to have a tough time when this one gets rolling. The only problem I see with this card, and possible deck, is that there are many popular attackers out there that have free retreat, namely Yanmega, so players won't even need a card like Switch to break out of the lock. They'll just simply have to retreat normally into a different attacker. I'm not saying that this is going to be a bad deck, but it will find its hard matchups against the top decks at the moment. This card will probably be better without Trainer Lock and with more emphasis on Pokemon capture, since you'll be able to choose what to lock in place, but there's definitely some testing to be done to ensure the best way to implement this card. It definitely has potential, but does it have enough to stand up to the speedy free retreaters taking the competitive world by storm at the moment? Two of the other legendary trio feature in this set, and they also bring us our 2 full art cards, but are they playable like the other full arts given to us in black and white? I'm afraid to say, it isn't looking too bright. Let's look at them both next to each other. They both share the same HP, and both have pretty identical attack layouts, but both with different effects and typing. Tornadus boasts a colourless typing, and subsequently has an all colourless cost on both of its attacks. The first, Energy Well, for a single colourless doesn't do any damage, but it does allow you to choose one energy attached to your benched Pokemon and then move it to the active. Since it doesn't specify the type of energy, this does include double colourless, which means you could be saving yourself a turn of powering up if there's already one on the field. Its second attack, which you can power up with the first, Gale Force, costs 3 colourless energy and has a base damage of 80. The catch to this attack is that you have to move a basic energy from Tornadus onto a benched Pokemon. Since it does specify the type of energy this time, you don't have to move those double colours off of it, but this does mean that the other cost you paid is going to get moved away, meaning that you'll either have to attach another energy next turn to get the attack going, or use Energy Well, but that means waiting 2 turns to attack again, obviously not a good idea. The cost to damage ratio on this isn't bad, but this effect does make it slightly worse since it means you're going to have to keep putting energy onto it to keep it on the offensive. Some people are even consider running this in Zekrom to help balance the Donphan matchup, since it will be able to wall for a while with that -20 resistance, and it can also move energy around to a waiting Zekrom on the bench. However, Donphan isn't going to be worried about what's in the active spot when Pokemon Capture hits the scene, so I'm not sure if this is going to be the best of strategies. Overall, I can't see many uses for this card competitively. As for Thundurus, it has a much better type for the competitive world, with its main target being both Yanmega and Kingdra, highly played cards at the moment, but does it have the attacks to match? Recharge, for a single lightning energy, doesn't inflict damage, which mirrors its colourless counterpart, but this time it allows you to pluck a lightning energy from the deck and attach it to this Pokemon. Now this is much better than the other one just mentioned, since it can give you an extra attachment in the early stages of the game, something that I can see Zekrom taking advantage of. If you can get those energy out early with this card, you may be able to shaman them across next turn to get the Bolt Strike going as soon as possible, as long as you have a means of retreat of course, but 1 retreat cost isn't too bad. Something definitely to consider for you Zekrom players out there. As for its second attack, Disaster Bolt, for 2 lightning and a colourless, does 80 base damage, and you must discard an energy attached to Thundurus. The attack isn't so bad, but it has the same cost as Zekron's attack, but with a 40 lower damage output. Fair enough, it doesn't have the backfire of 40 damage to itself, but Zekrom does have a great way to take full advantage of that when it occurs. I feel that maybe this one is going to be outshadowed by Zekrom's superior attacks and use of energy, but Thunderous's recharge could lead to it being a potential inclusion in someone's future Zekrom list. That's going to be it for all the standout Pokemon, so let's move on to the trainers and supporters now, which I feel are the best part of the set. There are a couple of little gems in here, and I'm sure you know which one in particular I'm talking about when I say that there's definitely going to be one that's going to have a huge impact on the game. The first comes in the form of a supporter and features a prominent character in the video game, Cheron. This card has a simple yet effective effect: draw 3 cards. Now this effect immediately brings to mind Cheerleader's Cheer, a card that was maxed out in one of the top 32 Reshirbor lists, but Cheron brings it one step further. When using Cheerleader's Cheer, you were giving your opponent an extra card, which is never good, but Cheron takes away this drawback of its predecessor, making it clearly the superior card. In terms of playability, I'm really not sure how well it's going to fare against the likes of Pont and Professor Juniper, but I reckon they'll see a fair amount of play, simply because it provides with a good form of draw in a format that doesn't really contain much. Sure, this card only draws one better than that awful Bill card that no one uses anymore, but that one card makes all the difference in this kind of format, from a form of draw being bad or being good enough to include in decks. I don't think that this card could be used by itself as a draw engine, because it isn't going to get you out of bad hands. It's a card that is designed to make your workable hands even more workable during your turn. It's going to be one of those that different players have different opinions on. For those of you that played the black and white games, this is yet another character in the game, and it carries an effect that matches the old Professor Birch card back in the EX Fire Red and Leaf Green days. So some of you may have guessed what it does already, and for those of you that don't, it's a supporter card that allows you to draw cards from your deck until you have 6 into your hand. Straight away, we must compare this to one of the most used supporters at the moment, Professor Oak's New Theory, since they are very similar in what they do. Both are supporters, but Pont allows you to shuffle away any cards to get a fresh 6, whereas Bianca has to have less than 6 cards in hand to be used, and you keep the cards that you already have. The question this entails is which one is better. I personally would say Professor Oak's New Theory, simply because when you're after some refresh, what you have in your hand usually isn't the best anyway. Plus, you have the advantage of shuffling in a poor hand of more than 6 to gain something you need for the turn, which is where Bianca fails. The next card I'm going to talk about is Max Potion. This card was a questionable release for the set, but now that it has hit our shores, it's going to be a great card. This trainer simply states choose one of your Pokemon, heal all the damage from it, and then discard any energy attached. Hopefully, you can already see the potential here, since we have low energy attackers such as Donphan, Kingdra, and more importantly Yanmega running circles around the competition at the moment. This card is going to be great in stage 1 rush decks, which can take a bit of damage, but then can take full advantage of healing all damage to reset the opponent's chances of making a comeback. Where I see this working incredibly well is in the Yanmega mirror match. Blissey Prime was used as a tech in one of the top 4 US Nationals lists as a tech for Mirror and worked a charm, but this is the same power in a reusable trainer. I can see this slotting into many lists in the current format, and it's going to be a very powerful card upon release. Crushing Hammer has been fairly underlooked so far, and that's probably because it adds to the amount of flips decks can have at the moment, which isn't something that most of us want to do. What Crushing Hammer does is instruct you to flip a coin, and if heads, discard an energy attached to any of your opponent's Pokemon, be it benched or active. Now this could actually be fairly good against Magnezone players, since it could deny them one of their energy used to power Lost Burn, forcing them to attach, but the flip just means that it isn't reliable enough. Where it could be interesting is discarding cards like Double Colourless, putting your opponent at a serious drawback when attacking with something like Zoroark or Zekrom, but we already have a card that does that regardless of a flip. Lost Remover does only target special energy cards, but it doesn't have the risk of a flip to send that double colourless, rainbow or rescue energy to the Lost Zone. Discarding a normal energy doesn't seem to be too much of a threat for me to warrant use of Crushing Hammer, so special energy would normally be the target of it, but when we have a card like this that does the same with no risk attached, I'm failing to see whether it will get used at all. Overall, since Lost Remover is so much better than this because of the lack of flip, I don't think we're going to see much of Crushing Hammer at all, even though it could have been a very interesting card. The second to last card in this analysis is a trainer called Recycle, which lets you flip yet another coin, and if heads, you can choose any card from your discard pile and put it on top of your deck. Unfortunately, we have yet another flip involved, but with the lack of emphasis on recovery we have at the moment, could this card help us out? I personally don't think so. This card would be much better if the flip was to put the card into your hand, but since you have to wait a whole turn to get it back when you may want to be fishing for something else, it doesn't seem worth it. The good thing about this card is that it provides us with the only real form of support we have in retrieving anything that isn't a basic Pokemon, such as supporter cards and Stage 1 and Stage 2s, so some people may want to just take that risk to get that possible heads up on the opponent in terms of recovery. But in my opinion, you have to be a pretty lucky guy to have that work out for you enough times to warrant a space in your list. Overall, yet again the flip makes this card unworthy of being in the competitive world. It has a really interesting effect which could be used well with the likes of Juniper or Bianca, but that unreliability just makes sure that this card just doesn't quite cut it. The final card on this very long analysis is one we all know and possibly hate already, Pokemon Catcher. I'm sure all of you know what this card does, since it's a direct copy of Gust of Wind from base set and allows you to choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and switch it with the active. This card has been said to completely ruin the game already, and it hasn't even been released yet, but I actually think it's going to be a good move. No longer will you have games where you flip tails on reversal and your opponent hits them all heads and continues to destroy your setup completely. Every single deck is going to have an automatic heads on reversal in their deck, in whichever number they choose, and I feel this is actually going to be a good move for reducing the amount of luck it takes to win games at the moment. I've been testing a lot with catchers right now and feel that it balances the field out quite a bit, but it does take some getting used to playing against it. You need to be wary of it all the time, and when it hits the discard pile, it's much more of a threat with Junkarn being around. I'm personally looking forward to the card, and it's going to be one of the most sought after cards from the set, causing a huge change in the format. Definitely look out for this one, if none else. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about our second black and white set, Emerging Powers. I think it's going to be a very interesting one to add to our current format, and presents us with a few ideas to be playing around with, but one card certainly overshadows the whole release. It's all about Pokemon Catcher in this set, so make sure you get your hands on them quick, because they're going to be in a whole load of decks come the beginning of next season. I hope you're all having a blast at Worlds right now. I'm eagerly anticipating the results, and I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you subscribe, comment what you think of the new format of PokeClass, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.